In this video we are going to take a look at the chapter approved Warzone Nephilim Grand Tournament Mission Pack, as well as the points changes that have been made available on Warhammer community for free. First, we will start with a quick look at what this chapter approved release actually is, then we will go through all the Space Marine and Deathwatch relevant rules and points changes. We will then look at the impact of these changes on the Deathwatch army and its popular meta lists. Lastly, there will be a quick wrap up of what has been covered.
Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Tammer and I will be guiding you through this video.
The second edition of Chapter Approved, released in 2022, consists of the Grand Tournament Mission Pack only, with the formerly bundled Monitorum Field Manual for points changes now having been made available for free online. Personally, I think this is an excellent and much needed step from GW, as the first chapter approved release earlier this year clearly demonstrated just how far behind they were on balancing the different datasheets. Link to that video is in the description. On the other hand, the mission pack will primarily focus on improving missions and secondary objectives, and as it has been teased already a couple of weeks ago, this time they also have significant changes to gaining CP for us in store. These changes are considered to be mandatory for matched play and will replace the rules and values of any previously released mission packs, codexes, supplements, and so on. Starting with the Grand Tournament Mission Pack itself, this release includes the missions, secondary objectives, the GT game rules, including the mentioned CP changes, as well as updated Warhammer 40k game rules with updated errata, which is very handy. For the purposes of this video, I will skip the missions themselves, as they remain largely the same, but instead focus on some of the changes to generic secondary objectives, as well as those relevant to Space Marines and the Deathwatch in particular. Bad news first, both Stranglehold and To the Last have been removed, which I think were both very viable secondaries for Deathwatch, with the first one being a default go-to for a great many armies anyway. Also further bad news for the double Corvus Blackstar lists is that Engage on All Fronts no longer counts aircrafts. On the bright side of things, banners got better, as you can now raise a banner on an objective you control even when an enemy is within range of it, and the banner only gets removed if the opponent controls it at the start of a command phase. But anyway, I think the main idea behind the Warzone Nephilim changes is moving more towards faction-specific secondaries, as in addition to nerfing some of the generic ones, the rules now also allow you to take as many faction-specific ones as you want, though of course the limit of one per category still applies. Now, this may ring some alarm bells for us Deathwatch players, as our own secondaries weren't much to write home about. The good news is that several of those underwent changes. But starting with the Space Marine ones first, Oaths of Moment got a slight nerf, only scoring 1 victory point if you have a core or character unit wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. Shock Tactics now scores at the end of your turn rather than the battle round, and it only needs your opponent to have controlled the objective at the start of your turn. Codex Warfare now scores 2 victory points for enemy units killed by heavy or grenade weapons while in Devastator Doctrine, which is slightly better for Deathwatch compared to other chapters, because we can actually pick our Doctrine order through mission tactics. But moving on to the Deathwatch specific ones, the Long Vigil scores 4 victory points per turn, minus the first, if you can keep enemy units from being wholly within your deployment zone while having one of your own in. Nice improvement there. Cull Order now lets us select all 3 categories, while for Crippled Stronghold the opponent has to pick one marker out of their deployment zone to be a stronghold, and if we can control that marker, we can do an action and it scores 4 victory points and reduces the opponent's CP by 1. Suffer Not the Alien remains as it was, and in the current Xenos dominated meta is pretty good anyway. Most likely together with the Long Vigil, these two are the best two of the bunch for now. Anyway, while it's nice to see improvements done, I still don't think that Deathwatch has super good ones, but I would say that between those and the Space Marine ones we should be able to make something work. Then moving on to the CP changes, this one is really big and has already been previewed on the Warhammer community prior to the actual release. For a Strike Force game, instead of 12 CP, we now start with 6 CP, but then get 2 per battle round, namely 1 in your command phase and 1 in your opponent's command phase. The catch here, however, is that the free Warlord trait and relic are gone, meaning that we get less CP to work with overall, not to mention that gaining extra CP in late battle rounds is far less significant than getting them early. At least that was true for the way 9th edition played prior to this chapter approved, where the focus was on early turn big alpha strikes and the matches often having been decided by the end of turn 3. It remains to be seen how this will play out with the new changes. Anyway, as I have said several times prior to the actual release of chapter approved, I think for Space Marines this is a massive nerf, as the faction as a whole has very strong relics and warlord traits, and Deathwatch in particular. Outside of our Army of Renown, it was not uncommon to see lists start with 6 or 7 CP, and even the Army of Renown lists were usually around 8 to 9. Such lists would now be somewhere around 0 to 3 CP. With these massive CP changes, one or the other Space Marine player may have hoped to be compensated for this through points decreases. So how did the points change for us? First of all, there are some good news and some bad news. Starting with the latter, I think for Space Marines in general, these points changes have not brought any grand comebacks. On the contrary, what we are seeing here once more is an attempt at balancing our vehicles through points changes alone. As a result, we are seeing yet more points drops to gladiators, land raiders, predators and so on. But as I was already mentioning in previous videos, I don't think that points changes alone are what is required here. Picture me enviously looking at that leaked Chaos Space Marine Land Raider datasheet. But anyway, these feeble attempts at rebalancing vehicles and the usual non-competitive datasheets like the Firestrike turret or Centurion Devastators aside, there are 2 points drops that stand out here for us. One is the 5 points discount on Outriders, which basically reverts the nerf that they got early into 9th edition, as well as Eliminators getting the LasFusils upgrade for free, which is absolutely crazy given their points history. But hold on, this was not even the best news, which brings me to the Deathwatch changes. Here we have all Specialisms dropping by 5 points, a very much needed change and highly beneficial to our Army of Renown, and we also have Kill Team Cassius drop by 20 points, bringing them to 240 points, which is very affordable, even if the unit as a whole does not have competitive loadouts. Overall, while I think that this points upgrade misses once more the core issues of Space Marines, both the cost of infantry as well as viability of non-Dreadnought vehicles, it is good to see that they have tackled Specialisms for the Deathwatch, which has been one of my main concerns regarding our Army of Renown. With all the relevant changes covered, what does this mean for the Deathwatch? Overall, there is a lot to unwrap here. Starting with the Secondaries, while I personally think that none of the Deathwatch ones are obvious auto-includes, and the loss of Stranglehold and To the Last will be felt, we also have to acknowledge that several of ours got improved, and combined with the Space Marine ones I think that we have an alright offer to work with. This is of course highly dependent on lists, opponents and missions, but I would say that overall we are coming out at least even from these changes. Personally, I like that we can rely more on our own Secondaries now, but at the same time wish that some of them were a little better. For the CP changes, as I initially mentioned, I think for Space Marines in general they are brutal, and particularly so for the Deathwatch. with no changes to the martial legacy tax and no points decreases to the popular Redemptor and Relic Contemptor Dreadnoughts, I think that this has been the final nail in the coffin for Dreadnought heavy lists. They were already struggling as it was, and their situation has only gotten worse. The Army of Renown, on the other hand, has always relied heavily on early turn alpha strikes. This could be seen by the comparably high starting CP of 8 to 9. The big question that any such list now faces is what few pre-game CP to spend among a sea of great relics and warlord traits, and how to go about the increase in late game CP when all we truly wanted so far is blowing CP early game on 10-man kill teams with extremists and the sword. Here we might well see a further shift towards double Indomitor kill teams, focused on less CP hungry loadouts, like Flamestorm Aggressors and Eradicators, which are best used in combat squads. One question that I think every new list iteration has to ask at this point is whether extra CP regeneration, such as through the Paragon of their chapter Ultramarine Warlord's trait, is worthy. For this, I think a little Mathhammer is in order. Fortunately, Goonhammer has done the work here for us already and created this fantastic graph where we can see how much CP we have to spend on average in order to get one back on a 5+. Basically, the way this works is that we pre-invest 1 CP, meaning we have to succeed once to break even, and any further successes will then pull us ahead. We can roll for every CP spent, but can only gain 1 each battle round. This means if we wanted to benefit in round 2 already, we would have to spend 2 CP in round 1 for a 56% chance of success, barely more than 50-50, and a whole 3 CP for a chance of 70%. Mind you, this is just to break even. In practice, I think this will mean that the chance to actually get the benefits prior to round 3 is very unlikely, and as I initially mentioned, unless round 4 and 5 become far more important than they previously were, this warlord trade is now actually worse than before, as the current CP gain is already aimed towards later rounds. This theory of mine seems to be further backed up by Goonhammer's recently released Nephilim CP Crunch article, which analyzes the impacts of these CP changes based on the ITC Battles app data for Nachmund games. As always, I highly recommend reading the full article by yourselves, the link is in the description. But in a nutshell, Deathwatch had below average starting CP by faction, even with the Army of Renown, and yet worse, average CP gains by Deathwatch is average at 3.8 CP per game, which includes the 1 CP previously gained for each battle round, further hinting at both games being over prematurely, as well as Adept of the Codex not refunding all that consistently. Last but not least, this general chart further illustrates that the less starting CP for a list, the less CP spent during the initial rounds, the less likely to get any return on Adept of the Codex during rounds 1 and 2. Just to be clear, I am not suggesting that the Warlord trade is a bad one, but rather that it further shifts CP gain to later rounds, which is something Nephilim already does by default, and the big question is what kind of stratagems play do we want to pull in the Deathwatch that would be rewarding in later turns. Speaking of later rounds, I think one of the big winners in all this is the Spectrus KT. Regular viewers of my channel know well that I am highly biased when it comes to this kill team, but I think at this point I am no longer exaggerating when I am saying that a mix of infiltrators and eliminators is pretty much auto-include at this point. Eliminators have already benefited a lot from previous points drops and the Armor of Contempt change, and now with LasFusils being free, they make for a great addition to any Deathwatch list. Furthermore, due to concealed positions, they are paramount for forward deployment in the new mission format, and increased late game CP gain highly benefits such a kill team with access to the Phobos exclusive guerrilla tactics stratagem, in addition to the Army of Renown unique teleport stratagem. While the points update has been disappointing from an overall Space Marine point of view, I think the Deathwatch and the Army of Renown in particular are still coming out as winners here. First of all, the 5 points decrease of Specialisms is precisely what we needed, dropping our AOR lists by 20 to 25 points, depending on whether we are going with 4 or 5 kill teams. This more than makes up for the 10 points hike of the Primaris Chaplain on bike that they dropped with the last chapter approved earlier this year. Then, as previously mentioned, a Spectrus KT with Eliminators is another big winner, as we can now get the LasFusils for free, which plays particularly well into the Army of Renown lists, where access to anti-tank is limited. Last but not least, for those wanting to return to playing Infantry Outriders, we are now back to release points cost on those, with Armor of Contempt added on top. While I personally prefer a Fortis KT with Assault Hellblasters, or just playing a Protis KT with some veteran bikers, and perhaps T5 Terminator shenanigan mixed in, we have nonetheless to acknowledge that the Outriders option is back to being viable. All in all, I think that as far as the Deathwatch goes, this release of Chapter Approved is a mixed bag for us. On one hand, I think that we are getting a much needed points relief in Army of Renown list building through the discounts to Specialisms, but on the other hand, the large majority of datasheets within our kill teams remain unchanged, and the already limping Dreadnought lists take a further dent thanks to the CP changes. Speaking of which, I think the CP changes hurt us pretty badly in both pre-game CP usage, where we have a lot of good options, but also in early game where the Army of Renown in particular so far was heavily dependent on alpha strikes with Specialism extremists. Ultimately, it remains to be seen whether these small points discounts for us and much needed nerfs to some meta overperformers will be enough to keep us in the game. I think that we might as well see Indomitor kill team compositions change once more, and maybe even kill team Cassius will make a surprise appearance. Either way, now is the best time ever in 9th edition to play a Spectrus kill team, there I had to say it. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have looked at the 2nd edition of Chapter Approved 2022 called Warzone Nephilim, as well as the points changes made available for free on Warhammer Community. While the missions themselves remained largely the same, secondary objectives got changed drastically. For the Deathwatch, it is unfortunate that Stranglehold and To the Last have to go. On the other hand, the generic Space Marine ones are pretty playable, and even our previously underwhelming Deathwatch secondaries have received light overhauls. While I personally don't think that any of them are auto-include at this point, I would consider it at least as coming out even. The CP changes on the other hand are quite brutal, leaving us at half the starting CP and no more free warlord trait and relic, which heavily punishes both Space Marines and Deathwatch in particular. Here we will really have to think twice about what we can still afford to bring along, especially for an Army of Renown, which also happens to be CP hungry on top. We also briefly looked into Adept of the Codex, to which we have access through the Paragon of their chapter warlord trait. Personally, I don't think that this is worth the investment, unless we are seeing a major shift towards round 4 and 5 being played out. Having said that, not all is bad in Warzone Nephilim though, and while Space Marine points changes as a whole may have been pretty underwhelming once more, I think the Deathwatch are coming out as winners here. 5 points discount on all Specialisms is massive for the Army of Renown, giving us anywhere from 20 to 25 points discount, and we are also greatly benefiting from Eliminators now getting free LasFusils. For those that want to go back to playing infantry bikes, the Outriders dropping back down to 45 points are at least an option again. All in all, at this stage it is difficult to predict where exactly this will put us in the overall meta. Several overperformers have received points nerfs, while the Deathwatch Army of Renown remains playable, though somewhat limited in alpha strike capabilities with the Specialism extremist stratagem. As some lists have already shown in the past though, that's by far not all there is to our Army of Renown. So that's it for the new release of Chapter Approved, the 3 points changes, and their impact on the Deathwatch. How do these changes affect your own lists, and what kind of adjustments will you do in the near future? Do you guys think that these were good changes for us overall, or has Chapter Approved left a big dent in our Deathwatch pauldron? Let me know in the comments. Finally, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page where I will be posting links to my videos as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. I do also have a Patreon page. If you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated as it helps me invest into future videos. As always, thank you very much for watching, guys. Your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video. Give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.